All right, I think that we can get started, no? So welcome everyone to another VDEV CPR Bread seminar. This week we're very happy to have Paulina Oliva from USC presenting. Her co-author Chris Severn is here as well. And just to remind people about the mechanics of the seminar, although most people I see here knows the drill pretty well. The seminar will run for 45, 15 minutes and while Paulina will be presenting, and then we'll have 10, 15 minutes for open discussion. Throughout the seminar, you can drop your questions through the Q&A, and Chris will be answering the questions, and some of them I will pass them on to Paulina to answer throughout the talk. And otherwise, questions that are for longer discussion, etc. It would be great if you can defer them towards the end. In the last 10, 15 minutes, you can just raise your virtual hand and we'll open the mic for you to ask. And after the seminar, Paulina has been very kind to share her Zoom room so she can chat with people interested in talking about her research or your own otherwise. So with that said, Paulina, thank you so much for accepting to give this talk, and the floor is all yours for the next 45, 50 minutes.
Thank you so much, Gianmarco, and everybody for inviting me. It's really nice to have this outlet for presenting. Let me get organized here, showing my screen. Can everybody see it?
Yeah, maybe you can do full screen.
Oh, I thought I did that. Okay, sorry. We practiced this and didn't quite work out. It'll take a second.
Yeah, that's the one. Now you do Control L and you'll.
There you go. Okay, up and running.
All right, perfect.
All right, so thank you everybody for being here. Today I'm going to be talking about infrastructure investments and their effect on vehicle use in the context of Mexico City. And as Gianmarco said, this is joint work with Ana Hernandez-Cortez and Chris Severin, who will be answering some of the questions via the chat. Chris, I'll give the disclaimer. So this is not the view that this paper doesn't represent the views of the Fed and only represents the views of the authors. So I like to start kind of motivating this topic by showing this picture that is showing the number of motor vehicle ownership per 1,000 people across different countries with different levels of income. And what emerges from this picture is that there's a very strong correlation between income and vehicle ownership. And this correlation also holds over time within countries. So this different picture is showing the paths of car ownership over time for each of the countries in this picture. So we can see that kind of strong correlation holds there. However, if you focus on a given level of income, you can also see that there is significant variation of car ownership for a given level of income. And this kind of gives us a kind of a hopeful thought that maybe high levels of car ownership as countries developed are not inevitable. Okay, and this may be a good thing, right? That this is not inevitable, because a lot of recent literature has shown that transit might be very valuable. In particular, recent literature in the developing world has shown that transit is very good at connecting people to jobs, and in particular, individuals that are low income, and connecting them to very good jobs. Also, this has been researched in the context of Mexico City itself. There's recent literature that design of these networks matters for connectivity, but with a good design, this can be very valuable for connectivity. And obviously, we also think that public transit has at least the potential of reducing some of the really harmful externalities that come with vehicle use, which include congestion and pollution. And then some papers that show this as well. And finally, mostly for the developed world, but we have quite a bit of evidence of the influence of these investments in transit infrastructure in the long-run land use trajectories, particularly in terms of density. So cities that invest in public transit become more dense over time, and this could itself have impacts in the carbon footprint of the cities later on. All right, so given this, we would like to know if governments can have a hand in shifting this kind of auto adoption trajectory to one where people are more dependent on public transit rather than vehicles. And on this, the literature has shown mixed results. In fact, many papers have found very small effects of auto use in response to transit investment, but these findings come mainly from the developed world. And also in terms of riderships, so little kind of take up of ridership in response to investment in public transit. Now, some papers like Bonsno et al. have shown some heterogeneity, and this heterogeneity across different cities come in the form of older and denser networks showing slightly bigger effects. It is to this kind of second question in this slide that our papers want to contribute. So in particular, we're going to study how auto adoption in Mexico City responds to transit expansions. And in order to do so, we're going to use a newly harmonized repeated cross-sectional data on travel surveys for the years 1994, 2007, and 2017. What we want to do is, what we find is that there are substantial effects on auto adoption, and in particular, the scale of transit, so the intensive margin of this infrastructure investments is a key driver of the effect of the magnitude. What do I mean by this? Well, we find that proximity to one line has at most a small effect on auto adoption, but residential proximity to two or more lines is going to significantly reduce auto adoption, perhaps even with increasing returns to scale. We're going to find, as I'll show you, that these findings are very robust to various designs that I'll talk about in detail a little bit in a few minutes. So we next turn to kind of try to understand what is the source of these scale effects, and in particular, because we are interested in knowing whether these auto adoption effects are going to be robust, potentially robust to income growth, we're particularly interested in which income groups are driving these effects. So in order to answer this question, we're going to turn to a quantitative spatial model that is going to allow us to explore whether some of these scale effects are being driven by increases in market access. Market access is this formal notion of the additional value that this kind of transit expansions can generate. And we're going to focus on market access both in terms of work, but also in terms of consumption. So we can measure accessibility to markets in these two dimensions. So being able to derive this measure of market access is going to allow us to see whether lines, in addition to the first one, keep contributing to this measure of accessibility. And then the model is also going to allow us to better understand whether these increases in market access generated through transit compared to auto are having an impact on auto adoption, which is kind of not necessarily the case, since individuals may have some other reasons for adopting a vehicle other than the extra market access it provides. So what we find is evidence for these two. Sorry, let me kind of say one more thing here, that we're particularly interested on whether these additional market access expansions are bringing in new users of transit that are coming from the upper quantiles of the income distribution. So what we find is evidence of these two channels. So first, we find that there are indeed scale effects in market access. So additional lines beyond the first one keep increasing the level of market access. But interestingly, we find that this is the case for consumption market access and not so much for work market access. And we also find that, that there is sensitivity to increases in market access among all income groups, including higher incomes. And in particular, higher incomes are particularly sensitive to increases in consumption market access. So this is sort of a nice finding, because this tells us that high-income households are not immune to the connectivity that transit infrastructure can bring. All right, so our paper contributes to several literatures. I'm going to focus on the first two here. We also have some methodological contributions I'm not going to spend too much time on. But we, as I mentioned before, we have like this prior literature has shown these disparate effects of transit expansion and auto adoption, and our finding on the effect of scale or the intensive margin may explain some of these disparate findings. And we think, to the best of our knowledge, we're the first to document the existence of these large-scale effects. And we also contributing to this very fast-growing literature of investments in transit infrastructure in the context of developing and middle-income countries that haven't quite arrived to this kind of auto lock-in. So they're at a point where investments in infrastructure can really sort of shape the path that these countries take. We also have a companion paper that looks at the difference in effects within the subway and BRT. So I'm not going to talk a little about that during this talk, but know that we have that companion paper as well. All right, so let me kind of get going on the context of this of our setting. So our setting is Mexico City, which is a very large city, as many of you know, is about 22 million. And also it has the second largest subway in the Western Hemisphere, second only to New York. In this context, we have high use of transit. So about 65% of households in Mexico City use exclusively public transit for transportation. And we have that as this kind of expansions of rapid transit during the course of our kind of study period occur, we see rapid transits increase. It's also the case that multimodal trips are pretty common. So these are trips that involve more than one mode of public transit, including either subway or BRT, for example, but also buses or other types of what we call informal transit, but it's kind of a broader term. It's about 20% of these trips that use this multimodal trips. And we've seen, despite this kind of wide usership of transit, auto use has increased over time. We know that it's causing severe congestion and pollution. So let me kind of give you just a little bit of the details on the transit expansion. So we're going to be talking about rapid transit when we talk about both subway and BRT new lines. And our period of study starts in 1994. At the time, we had already a pretty dense lines of 9 lines of subway. And in the course of our study, the government added 3 lines of subway and 6 lines of BRT. So let me show you a little bit of what this expansion looks like. So this map is also kind of helpful to understand the nature of our data. We have this data from origin destination surveys, and these polygons represent the census tracts for which we have data in terms of people's trips or origin destination trips. The black lines in this picture represent the network before this expansion. The blue lines represent the BRT expansion, and the orange lines, the subway expansion. And one thing to note from this picture is, first of all, that it's a really dense network. It was dense even before this expansion, but also that is really, there's a lot of variation in the density or in the intensive margin, right, in different kind of spots. So some of these census tracts gain access to 1 additional line, some of them gain to access to 2 additional lines, et cetera, in terms of proximity to the residential tract. Okay, so our data comes from these origin destination surveys, and this is going to be a repeated cross-section that in which each cross-section has about 50,000 people at 100,000 trips. And we're going to have travel diaries for 1 day of the week that include trips of all members within the household. This is very important because you get a very complete picture of the travel patterns. For each trip, we're going to have information about the origin and the destination, the purpose of the trip, so whether this is a commute, for example, or it's a consumption trip, What modes did the individual take to make that trip? What was the cost of the trip, and what was the time that it took? And importantly, because this is survey data, we're also going to have very rich data on social demographics and very importantly on income. Okay, so there was a lot of work in the data processing and harmonizing of these different surveys because they are kind of far away in time. I'm not going to talk too much about it, but I do want to kind of draw your attention to one of the very key inputs into our structural model that is aimed at explaining the mechanisms, which was a simulation of historical multi-model travel times with counterfactual networks. All right, so let's start with a very simple specification that allows us to understand what was the effect on vehicle adoption of these expansions in transit. So this is a two-way fixed effects specification for at the household level, where our main variable, our left-hand side variable of interest is auto adoption, and it's coded as whether any member of the household used a vehicle in the trips diaries that we observe. We like this measure of auto adoption because it kind of speaks to effective use of vehicles. And just so you know, it's not very different than vehicle ownership, which we have for 2 out of the 3 waves of the survey. So our right-hand side variable of interest is going to be this measure of proximity to new lines. And the way we're going to define this is as a measure that goes between 0 and 1. It's going to take the value of 1 if the line or the station of the nearest line is contained within the census tract, and is going to decay towards 0 as the distance to that station goes to 2 kilometers, and it's going to be 0 after that. This gives us a little bit more power for the estimation than just kind of a typical dummy variable for proximity, but note that our results also look roughly the same if we just used a dummy variable. So we're going to have tract and year fixed effects in the specification, meaning that our effect beta, which is our effect of interest, is going to be identified off of the changes in proximity to these lines. We know that the identifying assumption behind the specification is that those treated units, so those kind of census tracts that receive a line in proximity, would have had the same counterfactual trajectory in terms of auto adoption than the untreated units. And we don't have many kind of periods of time in order to check for the pretrends for all the expansions, but we do have some expansions that happen after a second period of time. So we can check for pretrends for those late expansions of the transit, and we find results that are kind of consistent with this parallel trends. We also have additional specifications that I'll talk about in a minute. So the other potential concern with this specification is sort of the interpretation of this effect as a change of behavior versus just kind of coming from individual sorting, right, in response to the arrival of transit. So we do a few tests to kind of show that there's very little evidence of sorting. One of them is to look at whether observable demographics change in response of proximity to these lines. But we have other tests as well that kind of take advantage of the fact that we observe not only the heads of the households, but also other members of the households. And I'm happy to talk a little bit more about that if we have the time. For now, I'm just going to say that we find very little evidence of sorting. Okay, so that's kind of the simple specification. But as I mentioned towards the beginning, what we're really interested in is this intensive margin of the expansion. So we need to augment our simple specification to account not only to proximity to one of the lines, one or more lines of the expansion, but to additional lines beyond the first one. So now we're going to have a set of treatment variables of interest on the right-hand side, where each of this is going to denote the proximity to the nearest skate line, where proximity is denoted by proximity to the station in that line, okay? And with this new definition, we can estimate the effect of up to k-bar closest lines. In our case, k-bar is going to take the value of 3 for some specifications, or for up to 5 in other specifications. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the alternative designs to these main two-way fixed effects. Already discussed the identifying assumptions behind this one, but we may still be worried even with that kind of parallel trends test that there could be endogenous station placements. So we're going to have a few alternative specifications. The first one of this involves the addition of municipality year fixed effects that relaxes a little bit this parallel trends assumption and now assumes that within municipality. So this stronger specification or this kind of relaxed identifying assumption, it only assumes parallel trends within that municipality. And it's going to be robust to these kind of regional trends and politics. The second additional specification is a design that responds to the recent literature that talks about difference in difference designs in the context of continuous treatment variables. Because we're interested in this intensive margin effect of the number of stations, this literature is relevant to us. And this literature poses that in the cases of continuous treatment variables, in our case, like the number of stations, you need a stronger parallel trends assumption that requires that units that were treated at higher doses would have had the same counterfactual trends than units that were treated at lower doses. So this is a strong parallel trends assumption. And this literature discusses a way to relax this assumption, which is a way to assume it locally. So to assume it within like short spans of the intensity in the treatment. So in our case, that boils down to estimated effect of the Kate line, conditional on having K-1 line in the last period. So that's what we called our scaffolded design. And the last design that we look at for this two specifications is one that uses a master plan that was put together in 1985 that designated the kind of the trajectories or the paths for these lines to be constructed in the next few years. And our thinking here is that if you're worried about kind of endogenous placement, in 1985, the predicted evolution of auto adoption or of transit use is going to look the same for those stations that were planned to receive stations at the time. So we're going to restrict our sample to those tracts that were planned to receive stations and compare those that actually received them to those that didn't receive them, but within those that were planned in this, according to this master plan. Okay, so let me show you the results. First of the simple specification. So we have here the baseline, the municipality, and the plan maestro or master plan design, which are the relevance for the simple specification. And here, you can see here the mean of vehicle use and at the baseline, and you can see that the effect is relatively small and it's not very robust to different specifications. Now it is small compared to the effects that I'm gonna show you that have additional that look at kind of the scale effects of additional stations. But it's perhaps a little bit large relative to the previous literature that finds even smaller effects on the first line in the context of some of the papers here are in the developed world and some in the developing world. Okay, so let me show you the results for the scale effects. So this is showing you all the results at the same time. Importantly, these are cumulative effects of the lines. So the first kind of set of coefficients is showing you 0 lines, then 1 line, then 2 lines, and so on and so forth. And here you can see that there's a big jump between the first line and adding the second line. So the marginal effect of the second line is the difference between the coefficients in these two sets of spikes. And the other thing that you can see from here is that this kind of story about there being important an important dimension of intensive margin effects is robust to all the different designs that we have. Okay, so we have several robustness and extensions. In the interest of time, I'm gonna go skip through some of this to go straight to the model to discuss a little bit of the mechanisms that we think are behind these effects. I'm happy to talk more about them. I'm sure Chris can also answer some of the questions via the chat about some of these robustness and extension steps. All right, so far what we have, yes, Gianmarco?
Yeah, one quick question before you go into the model. Here, how are you thinking about the endogenous placement of informal transit? And what I'm thinking about is these shared taxis with a set route, right? And so these lines are going to shy away from places that get a metro or a BRT line and to move towards what's your control locations, no? Do you
Yes.
have does that happen in Mexico City and do you take that into account?
So let me repeat your question to see if I understand it. So you're thinking about the other kind of modes of transit and how they're going to be displaced or kind of how are they going to get adjusted to
Exactly. So the endogenous placement of alternative modes of transport.
Yeah, so we're modeling. We are. I'm thinking of the model already, but let me think about it in terms of the reduced form effects. So our effects would be sort of like inclusive of those sort of general equilibrium impacts in terms of like transit reallocation. So what we find is that overall we see that transit is becoming more attractive, like. That's why people are kind of shifting towards public transit as opposed to using the vehicle as we see these expansions. So they're going to be inclusive of those sort of like general equilibrium impacts that may be occurring there. So, my kind of interpretation of that is it's overall improving, right, the accessibility through transit, even with this sort of general equilibrium effects of displacing other modes of transit or public transit that are not the rapid transit.
Great, thanks.
Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the mechanisms here. So I'm going to get into the model. So far, what we've seen is we see these strong effects of additional lines beyond the first one, and we would like to know, what kind of reasonable question is. Obviously, not all of these lines are created equal, right? So what is it about these additional lines that makes them valuable? And in particular, we would like to know whether these additional lines are substantially increasing the connectivity that they provide to the rest of the locations of the city. So this is where we rely on this quantitative spatial model literature that has created this very handy concept of market access, which is very attractive in this context because it's going to reflect not only improvements of the speed in speed to accessibility to these different locations, but also the value of the locations, right, that have gained accessibility. So it's going to kind of encapsulate these two notions that are important to us. Obviously, lines that connect you to more valuable locations are going to be more important in terms of accessibility than lines that connect you to less valuable locations. And this model is also going to be handy at kind of helping us understand how much this market access matters, right? So market access through transit is only going to matter for auto adoption to the extent that households care about it. And you could imagine that for some households in our population, it's really more about the kind of the preference for the mode, right? Like which mode they prefer, the preference of a particular mode that rather the kind of relative market access that different modes provide. So our model is going to allow us to do that. So I'm going to go through some of the kind of basic details of the model, just like a rough overview, and then I'll provide a little bit more of a detailed summary. So we're going to assume that our households indexed by omega have certain endowments. So they arrive to our sample with a residential location. So we're going to take that as given. We also observe what I'm going to call for now potential income. I'm going to tell a little bit more about the way I'm thinking about this. We also observe labor force participation. Here we're calling it working status, and we observe what job they have when they arrive in the sample, and we're going to call that the initial work location, which, as I'll say, they're kind of they have some room for changing. So the decisions according to a model that these households are going to make are sequential and are in the following order. So first they choose whether or not to purchase a car. So they make the auto adoption decision. Then we have these kind of two parallel decisions going on. One is which destinations to go for the purposes of consumption. And the other one is with probability P, if they have a job transition. So this doesn't mean kind of going on unemployment, but it could be like a job to job transition. They are going to choose another job location. Now, conditional on that destination, which could be either for consumption or for job purposes, they're going to choose the mode that they pick. And to make things very clear, households that own a vehicle are still going to have the transit as a mode that's available to them. But households that do not own a vehicle are not going to have that mode available in their portfolio of choices. Okay, so throughout this, something that is very important for us to be able to speak to is how different decisions at different levels of income are going to make these sequential choices. So we're going to try to model heterogeneous preferences by income in a way that's as rich as we can possibly can. And the challenge here is going to be that that in order for us to take advantage of the parsimony that gravity models bring to the table to put together this really nice market access term, incorporating heterogeneity becomes really, really challenging. So our challenge is basically it's basically twofold. One is what kind of income measure to use that is not endogenous. Other papers have shown that obviously accessibility to jobs may change your income. So we don't want to use absurd income because we know that's going to be the endogenous. So we're gonna to kind of answer this challenge, we're gonna use a mean serial type prediction of income, taking advantage of the rich social demographic data that we have from these households. So we're gonna have this what we call potential income depend on characteristics that are fixed, such as age and education. And where the other challenge that is going to come to us is how to allow for this flexible heterogeneous preferences by income. And our answer to this is going to be to use a latent class assignments of households to income classes G, where this latent class assignment is going to depend on this measure of potential income. And this dependence is going to, because income is order, this dependence is going to go through, is going to be through an order logic. So this step allows us to map potential income into income classes G using a latent class model. And we chose three classes for the number of income classes because we're particularly interested on whether there are non-linearities in income, in how income preferences depend, in how preferences depend on income. All right, so I'm going to go through the steps of the model in a little bit more detailed way. I want to keep kind of the goal in mind. So the goal for us, a very important goal of the model, is to deliver a measure of market access when individuals own a car relative to when they do not own a car. Because that is the measure of market access that's going to matter for the auto adoption decision. And we're going to do so for every residential location I and every income level Y. Okay, so I'm going to go through this is a nested model. I'm going to go through the different nests, starting from the bottom nest, which is the mode choice decision. And in each of the steps, I'm going to tell you what is the input to this kind of market access measure that step is providing to us. So the kind of last rung of this, or the bottom rung of this ladder, to be more precise, is going to be the choice of mode curly K, conditional on purpose of the trip C, our residential location I, destination J, a status of car ownership A, which is going to determine whether a car is in your portfolio of choices. And very importantly, we want to allow for different individuals in different income groups to have, for example, different preferences, different marginal utility of time. So we're going to allow preferences to vary by income class G. We're going to estimate this part of the model using a nested logit model that is going to allow us to model substitutability between different forms of public transit. And it's also going to allow us to model multimodal trips. And this is important because this increases this kind of arrival of new transit lines, maybe tapping into the existing network of other forms of public transit. So out of this model, we're going to obtain this optimized travel cost D that is going to be varying by origin, destination, auto status, so auto ownership status, and very importantly, income class. And just to kind of focus your attention here on what's kind of the role of this model, the transit expansions are going to have an effect on this component of the model. So the transit expansions are going to reduce the travel cost, the optimized travel cost, when you do not own a car. So the kind of next level up of this nest is going to be the choice of destination. In this case, in terms of consumption, we're going to model individual choices of a destination conditional on residential location, an auto ownership status, and their income class G. And we're going to have individuals choose the destinations given kind of the last input that I talked about, which is this optimized travel cost, but also this value of the destination or the destination utility that is given by this term. And just kind of for intuition, here's where we take advantage of this infrastructure that gravity models provide. These value of destination terms, right, are going to be come out of the model, out of the revealed preference of individuals wanting to go to those destinations. And they're going to come out of it as destination fixed effects from this bilateral travel choices that individuals are making. So these are the components of the market access term that are going to denote the value of destinations. And because we can do this separately for consumption of work, right, they're going to be purpose specific. And we can also do it separately by different income classes. So we're going to allow different income classes to have different values of different destinations. So those terms are going to be entering this kind of market access term for consumption, which you can think about it as just a weighted average of these value terms, where the weights are inversely proportional to this travel cost terms. So parallel to the consumption choice, to the destination choice for consumption, we have the destination for workplace. And this is very similar to the consumption choice, except that individuals are only going to choose a new destination of work with probability P, which is the probability that they transition to a new job. So this allows us some flexibility in terms of which kind of decision is made first, either the auto ownership decision or the kind of job decision. And we're going to put, and we're going to derive from this step of the model a kind of work accessibility term that is going to be a function of both the travel cost to the current job, but also the market access to the portfolio of jobs that you have around you. All right, so we're down to the very last kind of top decision of the model, which is the auto choice decision. And this decision is going to be a function of the market access of while owning a vehicle relative to not owning a vehicle. And these are the functional forms of these relative market access terms for consumption and for work that come out of our model. And you can see here how this relative market access terms have the kind of inputs that come from the lower nests in the model. So I'm going to show you, instead of showing you equations for each of the steps, I'm just going to show you the equation for this very last step of the model, which is the vehicle adoption decision, right? Where the left-hand side variable in this equation corresponds to the same left-hand side variable in a reduced form model, right? Which is the auto adoption decision. I'm kind of looking at time, and I'm going to go quickly over this and get to the results. So we're very close. So what this equation is doing is it's tying this relative market access terms to the auto adoption decisions. And there's two things that I want to highlight about this equation. This equation is also mapping income levels to income classes using this latent class assignment probability. And we're also adding a time subscript to denote the different rounds of the survey. Thus, the identification of these terms, which are kind of our coefficients of interest, is going to come from variation in access terms. So the time variation in this access terms that is going to include changes in destination value and changes in travel time. We have also an alternative specification where we use IV to estimate this equation, where we only use the changes in proximity to the new lines. And in the case of the single class model, which is the one where we can use IV, we find very similar results. All right, so let me get to the results, to the punchline of this model. There's a lot of infrastructure here, as you can see. I'm going to get to the interesting part of the results, or the one that speak to the mechanisms that I alluded to earlier. So what I'm showing you here is the first rung of that sort of like mechanism chain that I showed you a few slides ago. So this is the first kind of step of that mechanism chain. We're looking here at the effect of transit expansions on relative market access, where relative market access is market access through car relative to not having a car or only being able to use transit. And what these lines are showing you are the different effects of this proximity to these lines for different number of lines. So the darkest line is the first line, the next darkest is the second line, and the next darkest is the lightest line. And for each different income groups given here by income centiles. And there's the kind of two big important things to highlight here is that we see the scale effects of additional lines for all income groups in the case of market access for consumption, but they're more pronounced for the lower income groups, right? And we don't see those scale effects as much in the case of work market access. So here, this particular story would be consistent with one that has also kind of been pointed out in the literature before, which is that it's often the case that good jobs are kind of geographically concentrated. So in our case, the first line is providing enough accessibility to those geographically concentrated jobs, but consumption is much more decentralized. So here, additional lines keep kind of expanding access to these destinations that are spread around the city that still have value beyond kind of the destinations that the first line gives you access to. Okay, so the second kind of rung of that, or the second arrow in that causal chain, comes from the effect of relative market access on auto adoption. So here on the left-hand side, or on the kind of vertical axis, we have auto adoption. Here is what I'm showing you is the coefficient of that regression, where we have on the left-hand side auto adoption. And again, we have this coefficient for different levels of income. And the red line is representing the coefficient on relative market access through consumption, and the blue line on relative market access through work. And the big punchline here, that I think the biggest takeaway of this graph, is that as we go to higher centiles in the income distribution, none of these effects are going to zero. So high income people care about relative market access, both for consumption and work, right? Which means that as kind of transit becomes provides more connectivity, this has the potential of bringing in high income people to transit usership. All right, so this explains sort of our mechanisms. We then try to use this model to replicate the reduced form effect, so we can do the same thing. We can kind of plot the same line. This is the effect of different lines directly, right, on vehicle use, just from the reduced form specification. But now we are sort of distinguishing by different income centiles. But also in the left, we have it going through the model. And in terms of the levels, we're not kind of as good as explaining the kind of extremes of the income distribution, but in terms of the levers, we're okay, except for the first line. So our model still predicts that the first line is going to have a significant effect on market access, while in the reduced form effects, we see less effects of the first line on vehicle adoption. Sorry, I said market access, but this is vehicle adoption. So we think that we're kind of in the process of exploring potential reasons for what is it about our model that it's not capturing this. And one could be related to the habituation and slowly urban environment in response to transit, that it takes sort of longer periods of time for these to evolve, and this kind of urban environment that favors public transit takes some time to develop, and we have some tests kind of showing some evidence of that. All right, so let me just conclude. I think I was hoping for 45 minutes, but I'm going closer to 50. So we combine our destination surveys to study scale effects of transit on auto adoption in Mexico City. We find that the effect of one line is relatively small, but we find substantially larger effects of 2 or more lines. Now know that it's not a trivial number of tracks that are receiving this kind of scale effects. We have 18% of the tracks that are receiving 2 lines or more. So these effects, in terms of who has experienced them, are not trivial. And we find that these effects are robust to different identifying assumptions. We then kind of turn to explore what's driving the scale effects, and we used a new approach using non-homothetic preferences in the context of a quantitative spatial model. And here we find that consumption market access drives the scale effects, especially at high incomes. And this is the punchline for the other paper, because in our other paper, we're finding that the effects of subway are not very different to the effects of BRT. This could mean that we could get scale effects for cheaper by using this kind of cheaper mode of infrastructure. So we think that these scale effects are very important in developing context where we have rapid transit infancy and ample potential for income growth. All right, let me wrap up there and turn it to questions.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. So there was a question from Peter Nies. Peter, if you want to ask your question, let me just open up the mic for you. Hey, boy. Peter, you're allowed to talk now.
Hi. Yeah, sorry, Giacomo, I couldn't reply in the discussion. I don't have to write there. But Paulina, great research, super interesting, and thanks for the presentation. I was wondering about spillovers between treated and untreated areas.
Okay.
So mainly, you say you find quite large effect compared with the literature. And I was wondering, so if you have less people driving in the treated areas, that would increase the incentives for the untreated areas, people living there to drive, because you have less congestion in the city, and then obviously time goes down, cost goes down, time cost, and therefore you would be more likely to drive. So actually have a treatment of the untreated in that sense.
Yeah. So thanks for the question. We thought some about congestion. It's kind of pretty difficult to incorporate that level of general equilibrium effect even in our model. But the way we've thought about it, both for the model and for the reduced form effects, is that the most kind of likely effect of congestion is going to make our results conservative, which is because it's likely that as you introduce kind of public transit in those treated areas, you're going to make kind of travel by car easier, right? And you're not going to have a similar effect in the control areas. So it's likely that we end up with conservative estimates on auto adoption in the treated areas. But yeah, we're working on it. We don't know how successful we will be in trying to think a little bit deeper and modeling those congestion effects. But it's certainly not super easy and something we should think about. Yeah.
Great. Karin?
Yeah, thanks, Paulina. Super interesting. 2 questions, really. The first one is on the kind of the implications. You motivated this with pollution. And I wonder whether you have any intuition on whether the scale effect would actually be the same, because there is a potential story where the big kind of you may have a car, but you don't use it every day. You use it once a week to go do your shopping or leisurely consumption, etc. But the pollution comes from the daily commuting to work, and you show that. I mean, one intuition of your results is you don't have much movement on that, and then you have movement on the other parts.
Yeah, so the way we focus on this measure of auto adoption precisely because we were interested in those sort of kind of long-lasting, right? This adoption of vehicle towards transit, which we think it's what's going to matter for pollution. So what we find through the model is that that the connectivity provided through transit doesn't impact a lot market access for work beyond one line. But we find, and let me go back to that, we find that there's still responsiveness to connectivity to work, right? So we're still finding that kind of connectivity to work matters for auto adoption, right? And this is auto adoption, so individuals that both kind of drop the car because now they have enough connectivity to consumption, or alternative because they have enough connectivity to work, will not be using car anymore because they haven't adopted the car. So we do think that this is an optimistic story in terms of the potential for of these kind of scale effects to reduce pollution.
I see. And so, but I guess that's what I was trying to understand. In your data, can you go further in terms of the intensity of use, or that's de facto already calculated in?
So there's the margin of intensity of use as well, which we're not, for the purposes of this paper, we're not talking at all about. We have looked into that as well, and with this data set, we can use into that to that margin. We just chosen not to focus on that. We've chosen to focus for this paper in auto adoption. But with the data that we have, we could have instead picked sort of like conditional on having or not a car. How much do we use it? My kind of thinking along these lines is that because I know the literature on what happened to the kind of driving restrictions and car adoption in Mexico is that once there's a car in the family, right? There's a lot of potential for people to use it. So we think that this kind of margin of auto adoption itself is particularly important.
Great. Let me pass the word to others. Thanks.
Yeah, and just to expand on that point, so the relevance for the effect on pollution of the intensive margin of car usage is really going to depend on the convexity of the effect of car usage on health, for example, right? So I think that there's some evidence that having sustained low-level pollutions is worse for health than having the pollution concentrated in a few days. And if high-income people are choosing to use a car on the weekends, that kind of levels up the pollution across the days of the city. But
that's an interesting comment. And again, for these, what you would want to bring down that kind of permanent level of pollution is for people not to adopt the car in the first place, right?
Yeah.
Because
I guess if you're looking at the long run, that's a relevant margin. Yeah.
Exactly.
Right. Giacomo?
Okay. So, hey, Paulina, a couple of things that I thought about. Hey, so one is in the just very initial results that sort of essentially like, I think the way you're defining 2+ lines within 2 kilometers, it lends itself to saying, well, the distance to the line is actually smaller, right? So if you have 2 lines and you define it as being smaller than 2 kilometers, if you have 2 lines, it has to be there closer. The minimum distance is actually smaller than if you have just 1 line. But I guess you're facing that in the model afterwards. Because the definition of 2+, right, it sort of implies that you're closer. It has to be. It cannot be the other.
I see. Yes.
But But I mean, that's just, but I think in the model, that's not really the main relevant part.
Yeah, so let me think about this, because in the basic design, so in this design here, right? I don't think that's necessarily true. This kind of
They're perfectly overlapping. Right.
in this design, this is going to be the closest. So the kind of this variable of proximity is going to be defined based on the closest line to kind of your residential tract. So that's going to have the closest distance and the potential for the largest impact in terms of proximity. So then when I add lines, right, when I add a second line to proximity, get that, the second line is necessarily going to be further away than the first one.
Well, the second one, once you define it, it has to be closer because it's going to slide, coming down. I mean, it's just going to, it doesn't, I don't think it's a very important point.
Let's follow up, because I think I'm missing something, but I'll follow up with you.
There is something that I was thinking about. So how do you think about the responsiveness of high income people? Is it, so that part was, the non-athletic preference, you get even more, but it's sort of weird that, isn't it weird that the effects are, very up there, like even at the very, very top of the income distribution?
Yeah, we were surprised about this as well, but it's kind of like an optimistic takeaway. We see that for higher incomes, the work effects are falling, but that higher income people still care quite a bit about market access through consumption. So the way I think about this is, I think, first of all, like the high income people are the ones that are sort of like at risk, right, of disadopting the vehicle. Among the lower income groups, right? Vehicle ownership is
lower. Yeah, sure.
Is much lower. So this is kind of the at-risk group to some extent. So from that perspective, I think that maybe it's not that.
I mean, I would expect, then I'll let Nicholas talk because it's been too long. I would expect, at that level, the margin would be, I don't drive, I take Uber or whatever, right? So I shouldn't respond that much to the line because I already have. But this is what you get in the model. So it's
yeah. I don't know if Chris, do you want to add anything to that? Maybe you have some intuition to this.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
So very quickly. So Paulina, thank you very much. So right now in Bogota, we're building the subway, right? And this has led to, a lot of construction sites and stuff. And, many times with this come restrictions for the use of automobiles, right? So it's called in Colombia pico y placa. So people cannot use their cars. And these restrictions have increased since we've started building, making a lot of public, transportation efforts and stuff. And this could in part be driving, this is pushing some people who were using their cars before. Now they cannot use them every day. So they start using public transportation, right? And if there is, any persistence in the use of transportation, this could in part explain some of your effects. I guess you cannot test this. This should show up in your pre-trends, right? If this was going on, you should observe people moving to their cars before the actual opening of a public transport line, right? And you should see that in the pre-trends. But I don't know if you can at least maybe check whether or not this constructions of this new transport systems came with automobile restrictions or generated a lot of congestions before the actual opening of the lines.
This is interesting. So my guess is that like similar sort of inconveniences would have happened, maybe not necessarily through kind of policy that's kind of pollution related, but just sort of inconvenience of using your car when there's like a big construction site and creating kind of traffic issues. We cannot look at, ideally what you would want to know, if you have like high frequency data on auto adoption, you would want to know exactly, like what happened kind of right before and kind of right after these lines opened. We don't have that frequency data, but we do have the ability to look at sort of differentiate or look a little bit of like the event analysis like study, right? Looking at expansions that happen at the effects of expansions relatively soon after they occurred and kind of further down in time. And we find sort of evidence that's kind of the opposite to this. So we find that as kind of time goes on, kind of the propensity to respond to the transit expansion grows. And this is kind of where our thinking that maybe this is also kind of creating this changing sort of the built environment around the lines and making it more favorable to transit as this expansion happen is part of these adoption effects. Chris, would you agree with that, the way I put that? Okay.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Okay.
Also, to some extent, in our setting, you know, the like time fixed effects control for some potentially confounding variation, but I think you're right for talking about how to interpret that.
Okay, fantastic. I think that we're just on time. Thank you so much, Paulina, and for the presentation, and Chris for your answers. Just a reminder for everyone, Paulina will be on her Zoom room. Nico put Paulina's address at the top of the chat, and he just copied it right now. I guess now Paulina wants to take 5 minutes to go to the bathroom and relax a little bit, but otherwise we'll see you in a couple of weeks. In 2 weeks we'll have another VDEV talk with Ingrid Almas from Soho University and Yale. So look forward to seeing you again in a couple of weeks. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye bye.
Thanks.